Hi everyone, welcome. It's 4:30 and I hope you all had a chance to watch the beautiful film of Lives Well Lived. Thank you for joining us today to celebrate Older Americans Month. It's the perfect time to combat ageism and ageist stereotypes. So thank you for joining us. Age Friendly Teaneck and the Teaneck Public Library and the Forum with Teaneck Public High School are celebrating by offering this free virtual screening of Lives Well Lived, celebrating the secrets, wit, and wisdom of age. Fortunately, you do see on screen today with me, Sky Bergman, the filmmaker, and Ellen Rand, one of our very great workers with Age Friendly Teaneck. And so my name is EJ Vizzi. I'm the project coordinator of Age Friendly Teaneck, and I'm so grateful that each of you are here with us to join on this Q&A session with our amazing filmmaker. I know I had just watched it. I started at 3 o'clock, and I'm feeling really inspired on this beautiful, sunny, at least for me, New Jersey Sunday afternoon. So let me go into some housekeeping for this webinar with you all. Right now, everyone should be muted and your videos are off because we are on webinar mode, not a meeting on Zoom. But if you do have questions, we wholeheartedly welcome them. Please type them down in the chat. You would see a little bubble at your bottom toolbar, or you can type your questions in the Q&A. We are going to offer maybe a couple to a handful of people to join in, to turn their cameras on and ask their questions directly with the filmmaker. So if you are inclined to want to join on screen, please let us know in the chat or the Q&A section. We'll keep our eyes peeled for that, and we'll give you permissions to start that when we're available for the Q&A portion. So let's get things going. I wanted to just start talking about Sky Bergman. So Sky Bergman is an accomplished award-winning photographer, and Lives Well Lived is her directorial debut. Her fine artwork is included in the permanent collections at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, the Brooklyn Museum, the Seattle Art Museum, the Santa Barbara Museum of Art, and the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, which is the National Library of France in Paris. Her book, The Naked and the Nude, Images from the Sculpture series, includes an introduction by Helene Pinet, curator of photography at the Rodin Museum of Paris. She has shot her book covers for Random House and Farrar, Straus and Guru Incorporation. And her magazine spreads that appeared in the Smithsonian, Art Farmer's Budget Travel, Reader's Digest, and Archaeology Odyssey. I know, I'm thoroughly impressed. Sky Bergman currently is a professor of photography and video at Cal Poly State University and San Luis Obispo, California. And Ellen Rand. Ellen Rand is a member of the steering committee of Age Friendly Teaneck and is the organization's internship curriculum coordinator. She was co-founder with Judy Disler, my apologies, of the Teaneck International Film Festival and has served as its executive director for 6 years. She has also been a hospice volunteer with Holy Name Medical Center in Teaneck, New Jersey. A journalist for more than 40 years, she blogs about aging issues at www.lastcomforts.com. I'll now take this opportunity to pass my virtual microphone over to Ellen.
Thanks, EJ. And again, I want to welcome everybody to this Q&A. We're so happy that Sky Bergman is here with us. And I think, Sky, you wanted to talk a little bit about the making of this film, how you found the people and some of the behind the scenes kinds of things. So I will just turn it back over to you.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen actually and show some photos which picture's worth 1,000 words. So I'm going to do a little bit of that. And please let me know if for some reason they're not showing up, but I think that they should be. So those of you that saw the film, you know that my inspiration for the film was really my grandmother. And she was my role model. And I was looking at approaching 50 and looking at what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And she was approaching 100, and I just thought I'd better film her because she was an amazing cook who never wrote a recipe down. And really the whole project started by me filming my grandmother in her kitchen cooking, because I knew that if I wanted to carry on that tradition and have those memories of her in the kitchen, that I really needed to film her. And she also still worked out at the gym. And for those of you that are thinking I'm too old to do something, she was 80 years old when she started working out at the gym. So it is never too late to start something new. And she had a phrase, move it or lose it, which she definitely lived by, and she loved going to the gym. And so when she was approaching 100, I said, well, can I film you at the gym? Because nobody's going to believe you're still working out. Mm-hmm. And she said, oh, sure. And thankfully I had a mic on her. And I said, Grandma, can you give me some words of wisdom? And that was really the start of the whole project. And so I put a call out for nominations to my friends, family, and all the alum that I've taught over the years that I've been at Cal Poly, which is about 26 years now. And I said, I have this little video of my grandmother at the gym giving her words of wisdom. And if you have somebody in your life who is as much an inspiration as my grandmother is to me, then please nominate them for this project. And I was just inundated by beautiful, heartwarming nominations. I mean, it was actually hard to pick who I started filming. This was actually the first person that I filmed. And in fact, he was a mentor of mine and a friend. And I thought, his name is Jesse Alexander. And I thought, well, I better start with somebody that I know, because if I really screw up the interview, I know he'll let me come back and redo it. And you have to remember, I never did anything like this before. I didn't know it was going to be a film when I started. So if I can do it, you can do this too. You just have to have a passion for what you're doing. This was actually one of my favorite people in the film. I know you're not supposed to have favorites, but Lucky Louie was mine. And I think I filmed him probably a dozen times, mostly just because I liked hanging out with him. And we became very, very good friends. In fact, during this pandemic, I would go outside of it. He lives about a block away from me, and I'd go outside of his doorstep and hang out there while he was making the mutzies in the morning with a mask on, you know, outside. But we definitely had stayed in touch. And he made mozzarellas every morning for his daughter's deli. He was also an amazing pediatrician. He had one of my favorite lines in the film, which I think of often, which is, happiness is a state of mind. You can be happy with what you have or miserable with what you don't have. You decide. And, you know, we all wake up on the wrong side of the bed sometimes. And I just think of that line, and it gives me an attitude adjustment very quickly. So I was lucky enough to spend 4 years interviewing 40 people. I do have a day job. As EJ said, I'm a full-time faculty professor at Cal Poly. So that was my job that I was doing during the day. And in between times was when I would work on this project. But what a gift it was to be able to put away all the other devices except for my filming devices and just really pay attention to people and take those 4 years to listen to people and to collect their stories. I just, you know, I think back on that and I think how lucky I was. This is Blanche Brown, who even during the pandemic, she teaches an Afro-Haitian dance class. It's online, so you too can take this class. It's through ODC in San Francisco. She's also an amazing quilter. Susie Edo Bauman, who at a certain point, she's Japanese American, and she was interned during World War II. And she was somebody that I sought out to interview because I felt like it was very important to tell the story of the Japanese internment and what happened in our country. Very easy in that age group to talk about what happened during World War II outside of our country, but I really wanted to be looking inward at what happened in our very own country. And she's amazing. My next short film is based on her family and on her. And then we were lucky enough, after we did the film, we had an amazing film festival run, and we won lots of awards, and I got to travel all over the country. But one of my favorite things was Rose Albano Ballestero, who talks about being the only Latino in her Girl Scout troop, Rose and I went to the annual Girl Scout convention and actually showed the film at the Girl Scout convention, and she got to tell her story. And I was a brownie when I was a kid, so that was a really fun moment for me. But also Rose went with her daughter, and just what a wonderful experience that was to have that, and for her to be able to share her story. And then we opened in theaters, and you can see some of the other names of films that are up on the marquee there. I never thought I would get up on a marquee with all these films that were Oscar nominated. We've screened through AARP's Movies for Grown-Ups and all over the country. But really, the best thing that came out of this film for me were the friendships that I made with all these people that are in my film. And I would like to say that I have 40 new grandparents. Mm-hmm. And that has been the biggest gift that I could ever possibly have hoped for. And I realized that, you know, there were a lot of people out there that I was lucky enough to have my grandparents as role models, and I lived with them for a while, and they lived very close, and I was super close to them, but not everybody has that. And I was lucky enough to partner up with a woman from the Psychology of Aging department here at Cal Poly. And we started doing intergenerational projects that have now sprung out all over universities and high schools across the country, where we show the film to older adults and to students in either college or high school. And we do a joint Q&A with them. And then they take the questions that I asked in the film, and they use that as a starting point to have a conversation with each other. And so they get to know each other, because I feel like the only way to combat ageism is when you know somebody from that other group. It's a little harder to have an ism about somebody if you have a friend that's part of that other group. And that works in both directions. So the questions are asked, the older adults ask the students questions, and vice versa. And then at the end, we do a big wrap party, and that is just wonderful. And here at the university here, I was able to photograph we did a big photo shoot day, and I would photograph the people that got to meet during these wonderful connections. And a lot of them still stay in touch with each other. Of course, during this virtual time, we shifted, and we're doing it all virtually, and we're working with Senior Planet. But this is one image that I love, because I think my grandmother would have loved that she inspired all these wonderful connections. And this is just a fraction of the connections that have happened as a result of the intergenerational projects that we've done with Lives Well Lived. And I think there's something about seeing the film. It puts the students in a mindset that they are really excited and interested in meeting an older adult. So there is something about the way that works, and it really makes a big difference. And then I'm very excited to say that we're going to be on PBS in September. So you guys are getting a sneak preview of our what's going to be on PBS. And I will stop there and let Ellen ask whatever questions you want to ask.
Just from a journalistic standpoint, I'm fascinated by how you were able to make everybody comfortable enough to be so honest and forthcoming.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that one of the things that I was able to do was, I think because the film was so personal, and it really was about, it came out of a complete and utter pure love of my grandmother. Mm-hmm. And I think that people realized that when I was interviewing them. I didn't know I was going to do a film, but I think that they knew my reason for doing it was out of that love, and there was no other ulterior motive. It was really because of that. And so I feel like the people that I interviewed really opened up because of that. I really took my time. So I would go and meet with people ahead of time without any camera gear, without anything, and just sit down and have a conversation. And I think that extra time, then when the cameras came and I would have just me and maybe a student, I was the lighting person, the sound person, the film person, everything. But I think having that more intimate connection made a really big difference. There wasn't a whole crew that was around. And so it made it a lot more comfortable, I think, for them to really, we just ended up having a conversation. It wasn't like an interview, it was much more a conversation.
Right. That's outstanding. Was there anything that surprised you or shocked you in anything that they said or revealed or wanted to talk about?
Well, I don't know if there was anything necessarily that surprised me. I think that, you know, obviously World War II was what came to the surface on most of the people that I talked to, and I think that that was really, you know, just because of the age of the people that were in the film. But I think the thing that maybe surprised me the most was that everyone had something in their past that they had to overcome, and I think one of the reasons that the film is still doing well and that people are still resonating with it is that, you know, their stories of overcoming the things that they overcame in their life, and that these people are so positive gives us hope in this time of this pandemic where we're all going through this thing together, that, okay, if we look at their stories and we realize, oh, we can make it through and there is light at the end of the tunnel. And so I think that, I don't know that that surprised me, but I think that that's been one of the kind of common threads that has emerged. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the through lines in the film is the impact of World War II and all the privations and all the, you know, the separations and the difficulties and like that. And I was thinking about the pandemic while I was watching the film again, and I was thinking, you know, we've all complained about the last 14 months and everything. You know, maybe we shouldn't complain quite so much. But obviously the pandemic has changed a lot of how we do what we do and how people engage in the world. I mean, so much of what we do, we are social creatures. You know, human beings are social creatures and everything is in relation to other people and like that. And when you can't do that in person, you know, it's hard to find meaning and purpose and you know, a reason to get up in the morning sometimes and like that. So I know that you've been in touch with some of these folks. How have they managed to cope in all of this? What have been their...
Yeah, I think that one of the things is that they all, you know, you touched upon this a little bit. I think one of the commonalities in all the people that I interviewed was they all had a sense of purpose. And I think that that's so important. You know, we forget how important a sense of purpose is, and they all have a reason for being. And, but I think that they also, many of them have embraced technology. They call people. I mean, you know, it was Marion's, who's in the film, her 90th birthday, and her husband figured out a way to have a surprise Zoom birthday party for her. This was last May. So I think, you know, he called me up and asked me for some help, but he still figured it out. And I think that that's the big thing, is that you have this idea that you want to figure out a way to stay connected. And so even though it's in this virtual world, you're still connected. And then I think the other thing that Marion talks about a lot, and, you know, because we still talk, is that humor helps get her through a lot. I think that that sense of humor and not taking life too seriously, that has really helped in the tough times. And you know, this is one of those tough times. Sometimes you just have to laugh and have one of those belly laughs to kind of get through and get to the next thing. But and that sense of resilience, you know, that we will come through it. I think knowing that really does help as well.
It was also clear that the arts really played an important role for so many of these elders, you know, whether it was being creative with painting or quilting or dance or like that. Were there people you interviewed where that was maybe not necessarily the case, or did this kind of strike you as, you know, this is a key way that people can kind of, you know, stay engaged and involved in life?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think that one of the things that I've reflected on is it that was just because of my calling out to people of like, please send me your nominations, and my group of people that I'm going to know would be more in the creative field? Or is it that people that are more creative are more fulfilled? As I don't know the chicken and the egg answer to that, but I would say, I mean, I can tell you from my own personal experience is that as an artist, I am never going to be bored. There's always the next project. There's always the next idea that I want to see through. So even when I retire from teaching, I'm not going to retire from being an artist. And I think that, again, it's that sense of purpose and that sense of usefulness. And I think that that is something that is inherent when you are somebody that's creative, is that you always have that next idea and that next project that you're thinking of. So I do think that there's something to that. But again, I don't know if it's tainted a little bit by the fact of who my pool of people was that I was reaching out to as well. That might be part of it. Yeah.
And I want to touch a little bit more on your intergenerational connections program, if we can call it that. You know, it's such a wonderful thing to try to connect elders with younger people. You know, we've done it ourselves with Age Friendly Teaneck with our summer internships, which are currently in abeyance at the moment. And we're starting a program where EJ will talk about it later, but this is our opening new digital doors, where it'll be a cable TV program teaching elders all about technology and like that. And one component will be teens talking with older folks about, you know, how they navigate their phones, their tablets, their computers, and like that. So I know that you're sort of dedicated to trying to move this into the curriculum in different schools, and I'm wondering kind of where that's at and how it's going.
Yeah, so we have moved it into a number of different curriculums in different universities, and we have kind of a learning module that's a plug and play sort of module where there's a service learning component. So this is part of that of a class where they have to actually spend a certain amount of time with an older adult, and this is just makes it more of a kind of a way to put it together in a way that the students get credit for it. And the person that I work with here in the psychology of aging, that teaches the psychology of aging class, actually did her dissertation where she studied 2 classes. We've been doing this for almost 4 years now, so this is not a new thing. And she studied one class where we didn't use a Lives Well Lived model, and one class where we did, to see what the results were at the end of the class in terms of stereotypes of aging and how they changed. And we were hoping that using the film would actually make a difference, and in fact it did over a year's period of time. And I think one of the reasons that it works is that it's really difficult to say to somebody, okay, well, go interview an older person. And that's true for anything. You know, if you're going to interview somebody, it's really hard to do that unless you have a list of questions and a starting point. And so what we do is we give that framework of, this is how you can make it happen, and here are the 20 questions that you can use as a starting point. And if you go off from there and go on some tangent, that's fine, but at least you have a starting point of where you can begin the conversation. And I think that has been the most helpful thing. And then there's also this common goal that at the end of the quarter, we're going to have a big wrap party, and the students have certain questions that they have to answer and a presentation that they have to do. So that also helps. So we're going to, that's like you know, we have a 10-week and a 15-week model to make something like that happen in a class.
I think we should point out, and we'll let people know later on too, but you have a wonderful discussion guide on your website about how people can kind of do this on their own, and people can kind of share their own stories on your website for what they consider to be lives well lived. So you can talk about that a little bit and how the response has been.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I realized that at a certain point, I had to stop interviewing people, or I would never have gotten a film. And I think that as people realized what I was doing, and I had some short video clips, everybody, all of a sudden I got like inundated with even more nominations of incredible people. And rather than just say no, I made a place on the website where people can share their stories. And not all the questions that I asked, but about half of the questions that I asked are on the website. And so people can share their story, and then I upload it, and then they become kind of part of the Lives Well Lived project. And but even if you don't use it for that, you just use the questions to get to know an older adult, or even if you are an older adult and you want to leave that legacy for your kids, your grandkids, it's a great place to start. Because again, you know, how do you start that dialogue? It gives you a starting point. And I'll tell you a really quick aside, which is that I had a student who went with me on the interview, the very first interview that I did with Lucky Louie. And Lucky Louie can talk, as you can tell from the film. And I had never, you know, I had met him one time before just to get to know him, but I had really was very early on in our friendship. And we had a great interview. And then I went out with the student, his name is James, and James and I went out to lunch, and he just said to me, "Oh my God, I never knew that older people could talk so much." And I just said, "Well, don't you have an older adult in your life?" And he said, "Well, I have a grandfather, but I've never really spent very much time talking to him." And it was right before Thanksgiving. And I said to him, "I'm your teacher, so I'm going to give you this assignment. I want you to take these questions that we just asked Lucky Louie, and I want you to go home and I want you to ask your grandfather these questions." And he came back from that trip and he was glowing, because he and his grandfather had never really had a good conversation before. It was that neither one of them knew where to start the conversation. And his grandfather was so tickled pink that he cared enough to ask these questions that it opened up the floodgates. And now they have this great relationship that they just didn't know how to even start. And I think, those are the kinds of things that I love when they happen as a result of maybe somebody seeing the movie where it sparks them to think about interviewing somebody that they hadn't thought about. Because I'll tell you, the biggest regret that people had that were in the film was not asking somebody a question of a person that had passed away, that it was too late at that point. And so I would say to all of you out there, ask those questions, write down your stories, leave those legacies for the people that are, that you want to know who you are. And everyone has an amazing story to tell if we just take the time to listen. Sure. We so often just don't take the time to listen. So if we can allow that space to happen, everyone, and I would venture to say everyone on this web call today has at least one amazing story to tell.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that perfectly segues actually into one of the Q&A comments someone had left. Her name is Bonnie, and she had said that she recorded an interview with her mother just to keep for the family. And it just has so much great history in it. And she also recommended that everyone should do this before their grandma or grandfather passes away. I know I was talking earlier, and I think that, I had kept some voicemails from my father-in-law, and, from just people in my family who I know, they're just memories I want to make sure I hold on to and keep. And so I think that is definitely wonderful advice to receive. Mm-hmm. And Elsa actually had a question regarding advice. She said, so she had two questions, and I'll put both of them out there right now. The first question Elsa asked was, I noticed all the interviewees gave positive advice. For example, always rather than never. And so she wanted to know whether this was done consciously. And then her second question is a little bit more personal, but it maybe helps us get to know you more. Is there a story behind your first name?
Well, I can answer maybe the second question first. I was born in the 60s, and my mom's nickname for me was always Sky. And when I moved out to California, I decided to legally change my name. So she loved that. That was great. My dad just wanted to make sure I wasn't changing my last name. So I will never change my last name. And he was fine with that. And then, that's an interesting observation about the way that those people spoke and about their advice and their wisdom. And I really hadn't picked up on that, but there may be something to that. I'm not sure. I think that, there is something about having that positive outlook. And I think that all the people in the film were people that were glass half full rather than half empty people. And I think that comes across, and that may just be in the way our language can really reflect who we are. Mm-hmm. And what our beliefs are about even ourselves, or those kind. It's really important what you tell yourself, right? Because you can almost make things happen by the way that you tell yourself things. And so perhaps that's part of that. The way that they have managed to stay so positive is in the way that they communicate and in the way that they phrase things. So very good observation. Thank you for that.
Thank you for answering. And that actually might lend into this next question by Jackie. Many of our interviewees appear to live in California and your grandmother in Florida. So for those of us who also want to live a good life and a life well lived as they age, should we consider moving to sunnier climates?
That is a good question. I don't know if it's necessarily the climate. I did have some people in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I did have some people in Pennsylvania. I think it was just location. For me, it was locationally advantageous to film people in California and in Florida because it was my grandmother and I could drive there, and I think I was doing this on a shoestring budget. I self-funded the film by renting out rooms in my house through Airbnb. So I think I made sure everybody that worked on the film got paid. So that was really important to me. But I really had to be cognizant of cost. And I think that that was really a big part of it. But I think you could find these positive stories anywhere. And I don't know that it's a warm climate. I mean, I know for me, I like living somewhere where I can get out and walk every day. You know, that is important to me. So I don't know if that's important to you, then maybe that is part of what needs to happen in order to, you know, have a life well lived for you, because you can be outside. But for some other people, like my dad, who still lives in Northeast Philly, he doesn't mind the cold and he likes it. So I think it really just depends on what you're, you know, who you are and what you enjoy. And also, I think a big part of it is also, for many people, being around family and being around a support system. Doesn't necessarily have to be family, it could be friends, but who's your tribe? Where is your tribe? Where are those people that make you feel good when you're around them? That's almost, I think, more important than the weather, you know, is being around other people that really pull you up rather than pull you down. So I would say that whether it's where you guys live, which I know you have all 4 seasons, which we don't necessarily, but I think it's really the people that you're around more than anything else.
Great point. That's a great point. Having had the experiences now that you've had, having done this film, having been involved with intergenerational connections and like that, does it strike you that, you know, when you watch the media, that older folks are kind of treated either as if they are, you know, super people, you know, they're kind of, you know, doing parachute jumping and what have you, or they're just kind of frail and doddering and ridiculous? And, you know, for most of us who sort of live somewhere in between, you know, we don't get a chance to see a lot of our stories in the media. So I'm wondering if you become a little bit more sensitive to that.
Yeah, I'm definitely much more sensitive to that. And I think that it, you know, one of the things that I wanted to do with this film was to show everyday people. So I specifically didn't pick people that were known, or, you know, I mean, they were everyday people, because I feel like the media, either you see a film about, like you said, people that are old and frail and not doing well, or it's somebody that's, like you said, skydiving. And I think that's true on the opposite extremes, like the youngest person or the oldest person. That drives me crazy, because then what about, like, well, what if I do that and I'm 55? What does that? Doesn't mean anything, you know? And I think that's a bad message to be sending. So I think that that is a problem. That being said, you know, I think that that was one of the reasons that I wanted to do this film, because I wanted to have role models. I mean, again, I didn't know it was going to be a film, but I was just more like, I want to interview and find people out there that are not being represented in the media. And how can I show that in a way that gives me hope of what my life is going to look like as I age? And so, you know, I very specifically, I'm not a social scientist. I very specifically chose people to be in the film that were positive. That doesn't mean that they were all really super healthy. I mean, my dad is in the film and he's had several strokes and is in a wheelchair, but he's positive in terms of his spirit. And he's actually far more positive now than he was before his last stroke, because he's more grateful for the things that he can do rather than being upset about the things that he can't do. So again, that's really, it's all about that positive attitude. And that was really what I wanted to show, because there is hope. And, you know, I think that that's the thing that we have to remember, is that we should act our age. And one of the things that I remember, my grandmother very rarely was in the hospital, but there was one time when she was in the hospital, and I think she was over 100 at that point. But, you know, could totally take care of herself. I mean, I forget why she was in. And the doctor happened to be sitting next to her, and the doctor immediately, instead of talking to my grandmother, started talking to me. And I stopped him and I said, I am not the patient. My grandmother is, and you should be talking to her. I mean, he just made this assumption based on her age without even beginning the conversation with her. And that was really super annoying. And she fired him. And he said, oh, you can't fire me. And she said, yes, I can, you're fired. And I mean, that was a real wake-up call for that doctor, because he learned very quickly not to judge somebody by the number that's written down on their chart, but to actually maybe have a conversation with them. And, you know, so there is that out there for sure. It's what are the small things that we can do to combat that? And I think having these intergenerational projects where we bring different generations together, so that maybe a student who's in that college or that high school class has that experience, and then they meet an older adult somewhere else, and they don't have that same stereotype anymore, you know, and they go into a conversation or a friendship in a very different way because they've had this experience. Yeah.
So the next logical question is, so what's next for you? What are you working on now? What can we look for?
Well, I'm gonna share a link that in an email that you guys can see. I did a film called Mochisuki, which is the Japanese tradition of making mochi the week between Christmas and New Year's. And the Susie Edo-Bauman, who's in the film, it's her family that I was able to film over a 2-year period making mochi. And you might not tell by looking at me that why I would be interested in that, because I always say the more personal, the more universal the message is. My brother lives in Japan and is married to a Japanese woman and has 2 kids. And on the day that I was filming the Mochisuki ceremony, they were also participating in a Mochisuki ceremony. And so for me, it brings me closer to my nephews and to their culture and to learning a little bit more about them. But I love also that, again, that intergenerational connection and through food and through tradition. And I think that was something that was really important for my grandmother and I. That was when the best stories came out, and through food and through cooking. And so the next feature film will most likely be a feature about different cultures and traditions that are still prevalent in the US, where it brings generations together and that storytelling that happens. And, just a reminder that we are a country of immigrants, but what are the traditions that have continued on even though we're in this country, and how does that pass from one generation to the next?
Oh, I know I look forward to Mochisuki. My family, we circle around food. Like every time we're getting together, it's like, what's going to be on the menu? What are we going to be making today?
Of course.
And so I think a lot of families feel that way. And I'm glad that earlier you had mentioned not everyone maybe has the privilege of a great family, but I know with my group of friends, we call each other family, which is friends who became family. And so sometimes it is the chosen people in your life that you surround yourself with. So I thank you for bringing that to life.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that is so interesting to me is my grandmother, her parents came to this country and she never met her grandparents. So although I had this great relationship with my grandmother, she never had anything like that. And she was the one that would often say to me, your friends become your family. It's the people that you are around that become your family. And so I think, that's very interesting because I was so close to her, but yet she really instilled that in me. And when I moved to California, I was really out here by myself. And so my friends really have become my family. And now, like I said, I have all these great, grandparent friends, and it's just wonderful.
we talked a little bit earlier about how fortunate you are to have all of this footage of your grandmother. And I'm wondering, did she share her recipes with you?
She did, and I actually did a little video cooking show called Cucina Nonna, which means Grandma's Kitchen in Italian. And so we did, I think, maybe a half a dozen episodes, and we had the recipes at the end of them. And that was really how I learned to video, because I'd never done any video before. And if any of you watch them, which please just remember that that's my first foray into video, I didn't know how to do audio. And I was just using the audio from the camera. And then I very quickly realized, oh, I better learn how to mic her. And so, but that's okay. I mean, I think, like I said before, the more personal, the more universal. And it also, what a great way to practice with my grandmother, who is going to be very patient with me and would do retakes. And I would say, come on, Grandma, with enthusiasm. And she would bolster herself up, and she'd say, okay, one more time. I got one more left in me. But I think that it was really a great foray into the video making world, was to shoot those videos of her cooking. And it's a great memory for me, because like you said, now I have all that footage that I have. And it was a really nice way to learn a new medium, because there's a very big difference between being a still photographer and a filmmaker. And somebody could have a great story on paper and I could get a great still image of them, but if they can't tell the story, then it makes it really hard to include them in the film. And unfortunately, there were some people that had great stories, but when I filmed them, they just couldn't tell the story. And they ended up on the cutting room floor. I gave everybody a film credit, but some people just couldn't tell it. And that was something that I had to learn from moving one medium to the other. Yeah.
Speaking of lessons learned, we do have a question in the Q&A box by Colleen, and she mentions, it's important to know the right questions to ask to get an older adult to open up. But I imagine it's equally important to know what questions not to ask. So would you say, what are some not good questions or maybe some ageist questions to ask older adults when interviewing them?
Yeah, I don't know about ageist questions, but I will tell you that one thing that you want to avoid doing is asking a yes or no question, because inevitably you will get a yes or no answer, and that's where it ends. So thinking about how do you ask questions that are open-ended enough, and then really being sensitive to people. And you can feel people out when you're asking a question. If you've touched on something that is maybe a little bit sensitive, you maybe just back off a little bit. But also, if you have questions, I mean, what I did, and this doesn't work for everyone, but I felt like I wanted to give people the opportunity to see the questions before I asked and went in and did the interview. So I gave the list of questions to people ahead of time. And like I said, before I did any recording, I would go over and just go over the questions with them without any recording devices on, and just, then I got an idea of what they were comfortable with and what they weren't. And I did spend about 6 months coming up with the questions. I have the luxury of working at a university. And so I took people from the psychology department, from the social sciences department, I took them all out to lunch. And I said, here's what I'm thinking of. What am I missing? And that was super helpful to have that, to have that list of questions and to get their input into that. But I think, avoiding the yes or no questions, maybe giving them the questions ahead of time so they have some time to think about it. And also it helped me because then there were times when I would be recording somebody and maybe they'd meander off in some other direction and not talk about the thing that I thought was the most important thing. And I could bring them back on track because we had already had a conversation about something. So I think that that's super helpful. And then building that trust. I mean, I'll just give you an example. Lucky Louie, like I said, I interviewed him multiple times. And the last time that I interviewed him, in the film, if you've seen the film, he talks about his wife and that they were married for, forever. I mean, she really was his soulmate, and that he would never get married again. And he didn't take his ring off. And she'd been gone for over 20 years at the point that I interviewed him. Mm-hmm. And when I first interviewed him, I could never have asked this question. But by the last time, we were friends. I knew him for years at this point. And I said, Lou, you can answer this question or not, but you still talk about your wife as if, it was yesterday that she passed away. And how do you get over that grief? I could never have asked that question the first time that I sat down with him. So I think a big part of it is building that trust and building a relationship. And, the first time that I asked people, I didn't necessarily have that. But again, if you're doing it with a pure heart and for the right reasons, people will open up in ways that you could never possibly imagine. I would have sometimes sons or daughters that might be sitting in the background while I was doing an interview on just a few occasions. And because I usually like to really just have the people, it just made it flow a little bit better. But some of them afterwards were like, wow, I never knew that story. Part of it was I just had never asked the question. I think that's part of it. But I had a grandfather who immigrated from Poland and was there during the pogroms, and he could not talk about that experience. He just couldn't do it. And to this day, that's a regret that I was only 12 when he passed away, but he just couldn't. And you have to respect that there might be some areas of somebody's life that are just too painful to go to. And just knowing that is an area where you have to back off. So I think being sensitive and being compassionate and putting yourself in their shoes, I think is always the best route to go.
Okay, if we want to open it up to more questions and comments, we can do that.
Well, I had a question after watching that film. I noticed that, we are a country of immigrants, as you had mentioned. And Ellen had asked if there's anything that surprised you, but is there something that maybe you hadn't learned at all in history books that in interviewing these people, you kind of saw like the back door of maybe history?
Absolutely. I mean, I think I'm a little bit ashamed to say this, but I didn't really know that much about the Kindred Transport, and I'm Jewish, and I just that there's so much about the Holocaust, but for some reason that was a story that I didn't know. And then the other thing that I really did not know very much about was the Japanese internment until I moved to California. I mean, I knew about it before I did the film, but it was something that, because I grew up on the East Coast, there was never in any history books. We never talked about it. And it was when I found out about that, when I moved to this coast, I couldn't believe it. I mean, I just really could not believe it. And I think for me, hearing that firsthand account from Susie it blew me away. And that her husband died and served in this country. I mean, I know that that's coming every time I watch the film, and I still tear up every time I hear her say that. It's just, and I've seen the film hundreds of times, but there's just something about that, and that part of our history that, it's one thing to read something in a history book and another thing to hear somebody's firsthand account. And you can put yourself in their shoes. Like, I think about even Marion, I'll tell you, the reason that I ended up doing a feature film was when I interviewed Marion Wolff, who was the woman that came on the Kindred Transport. And for those of you who don't know the Kindred Transport, the Quakers in the UK saved 10,000 Jewish children before the war broke out by rescuing them out of Vienna and out of Austria and Germany. And she was on the very first Kindred Transport. And when I interviewed her, and she pulled out that cardboard number that they put around her neck at the age of 8 years old, I just realized, I originally had set out to make this film to collect all the wisdom of these older adults, but I realized there was something else. It was also so important to collect the history of what could be lost if we didn't collect those first person accounts. And I mean, I think back, like, what was I doing at 8 years old? How would I have made it through? I mean, she went on that train by herself to another country, not speaking the language. It's hard for me to fathom that. And so I think those were some of the things that really hit me as I was making the film.
Yeah, a number of years ago, my husband and I had a chance to see Manzanar, which was one of the camps, and it's just astonishing and horrifying. And you realize, the country has so much to account for. And you wonder, can it happen again? That sort of thing. That's why it's so important to capture history, to capture all these personal stories.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's really, I think why the film does so well with students, because they hear it in a very different way. And then you can read about it and you can read more and learn more, but there's nothing like hearing that firsthand account to really move you in a way that reading from a textbook just doesn't do it.
Yeah, I mean, I know when I was watching the film, this was my second time watching it. It's not only inspiring, but it's always humbling to hear about other people's life stories.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
But we're coming to about an hour being on. And so I wanted to make sure we open up to any last burning questions. Oh, Elsa did mention in the Q&A section, Dr. Ruth was on a Kindred Transport and was the only member of her family to survive. So that's incredible.
Yeah. Right. And think about what a positive person she is. And there was a movie that just came out about her as well. And it's really worth seeing. If you haven't seen it, it's definitely worth taking a look at.
But yeah, you had mentioned making sure that I think also that it's a great film for students to watch and to learn, because I think that whenever there's intergenerational programming or any time that, there are multi-generational interactions, they can learn from each other. It's a two-way street, 100%.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I'm very happy that when the film is out on PBS, it's going to be, we're working with PBS Learning Media as well. So there will be parts of the film that will be accessible for, teachers to use in their classroom, which I think is great.
Great. Because it's a wonderful starting point. It's a wonderful discussion point. And, we want to keep the discussion going at Age Friendly Teaneck. If you have any kind of comments or questions, certainly get in touch with us. And EJ, I will turn it over to you.
Yeah, so just some closing comments. Thank you again, Sky, for joining us on this program, and Ellen for helping to facilitate some of the questions. It was incredible, and I'm very excited for it. And I look forward to, kind of walking through more of these with you, and I'm certainly going to tune in to your future projects. With Age Friendly Teaneck, we had mentioned that we are doing a multi-generational activity right now. And so during the pandemic and some of the earlier months, we had done a survey with Teaneck to find out how older adults were faring during the pandemic. And so we had learned about those who maybe had access to digital communications and maybe those who didn't. And we did learn that at least for those who had submitted their responses not through the computer, but through paper and mail, that about 50 to 60% of those did not have internet access or were not using Zoom, even though Zoom had, had a huge boom during the pandemic. And so we had thought of the idea to create really close up the digital divide and create Opening New Digital Doors, which is a program featuring a series of cable access television episodes, trying to help people walk through some of the different lessons that they can have on TV. So whether it's accessing your public library or learning about Zoom, or even just logging on to your local stations, we wanted to just make sure we kind of help them through that. And then this supplemental part to Opening New Digital Doors is really the part that I'm excited for, which is the multi-generational and connecting trained teenage volunteers one-on-one with older adults over the phone so that they can really walk through some of these digital skills. Not everyone is an auditory or visual learner, and they learn through people and conversations, as this film has clearly highlighted. And so we're hoping that with the teenagers working with older adults and teaching them digital skills, the older adults can in turn kind of teach them just life wisdom, wits, and everything that they had talked about in Lives Well Lived.
And it's all free.
And it's all free. And so thank you again, everyone, for joining us today on this session. The program is still available to view. It will be up until, I believe, May 25th. So please tell your friends about it. The Q&A will be closing out for the day, but the film is available for free until May 25th. And after that, please join on the website of liveswelllived.com and join in on the discussions, and definitely follow Sky Bergman, because I continue to be inspired by all the adults around me. And I want to just make sure I model after you guys, because I find myself surrounded by people I just want to be as I age in my journey. So thank you again.
Thank you all. Thank you for having me. Have a good rest of the day. Bye.
Bye.